How do you know how much weight to lift? How can you dose training effectively while balancing climbing and lifting? How can you modify the program if you aren't performing well or you're in the luteal phase of your menstrual cycle? What if you're experiencing pain? Welcome to episode 5. In this episode, we're going to talk about all things autoregulation. This is something I believe everyone should be incorporating into their training. Not only does autoregulation help you dose training more appropriately, it also keeps training more sustainable by making your training more recoverable. Stay tuned for the rest of this episode to find out more. Welcome to the Strong AF podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Natasha Barnes. I'm a strength and rehab coach for climbers, and I blend my 24 years of expertise and experience as an elite level climber, competitive powerlifter, and rehab professional to bring you a podcast that will help you become stronger and more resilient. In this podcast, we'll talk about all things strength training for climbers. We'll also talk about climbing injuries, rehab, and why training and rehab go hand in hand. To connect, be sure to follow me over on Instagram at Natasha Barnes. To find out more about coaching or getting help with an injury, check out my website at natashabarnesrehab.com. And now, let's get to the episode. Welcome back to the Strong AF podcast. Today we're talking about autoregulation, and the first thing I want to talk about is what is autoregulation? Some of you may have never even heard this word before. Basically, autoregulation is a system that's applied to training that allows you to select and adjust training intensity based on your performance during a particular session. You'll use a subjective rating scale to rate your effort level on a given exercise in your training program, which helps you select an appropriate training load for that session. Yes, it's a subjective measure, but it's not training by feel or going off of vibes. And it's a valid and reliable way to measure training that can be learned. I'm going to link to some studies that talk about autoregulation and show that it is valid and reliable and it's learnable. Why is it important to autoregulate training? Well, your strength and fatigue levels can fluctuate on a daily basis. Therefore, so does your performance. Your performance can fluctuate for reasons such as your nutrition, your sleep, your stress levels, prior training, your mood. For some people, their menstrual cycle. Not only that, but people respond differently to training. They adapt at different rates and different magnitudes. Autoregulation gives us a structured approach for respecting individual differences in training. I really want people to understand that autoregulating your training isn't training by feel. It's not going in and selecting your training loads based on how you're feeling that day, because you can feel really bad going into a training session and actually perform really well. Conversely, you can go into a training session feeling hyped up, feeling excited, and you go in and you don't perform very well. And anything in between. I'm sure if you're listening to this podcast, you've had an experience like that in the gym, even if it wasn't in the weight room, probably on the climbing wall. So autoregulating your training just makes sense so that you can meet yourself where you're at for the day and keep training appropriate. I want to talk about how training is typically done so that you can see what the difference is between normal dosage for training programs and what it looks like when we auto-regulate the dosage for training programs. So a lot of times, this is how training's done. It's based off of a percentage of 1RM. I'm talking about strength training here, and this can be hangboarding, this can be resistance training with weights at the gym. A lot of times how it's traditionally done is based off of a percentage of your 1 rep max. Your 1 rep max, it can be useful, but basing your training off of a 1 rep max test can be problematic for a couple of reasons. So typically how it's done is athletes go into the gym, they max out on certain exercises, and based on that max out, your subsequent training is then based off of percentages of that. And here's why that can be problematic. So number one, As mentioned above, athletes respond differently to training. Sometimes 80% is going to feel more like 90 or 100% or more. And if you don't modify, it makes the training too stressful and unsustainable. Athletes are not typically capable of the same 1 RM on any given day. So, a 1 rep max test that you did, even like a week before, can sometimes be invalid the following week. But a lot of times, the 1 rep max tests that people are basing their training off of were done weeks before, months before. And that is not a great way to base your training because you're not the same person, you're not the same organism you were a week ago, 2 weeks ago, a month ago. Reason number 2 why we shouldn't be basing strength training off of a percentage 1 rep max, or at least why it's not super ideal, is that even at moderate percentages, so that's 60 to 80% of 1 rep max, there's huge differences between lifters on how many reps they can perform at that intensity. So if one person can do 9 reps at 70% of their 1 rep max, and another person can do 15 reps at 70% of their 1 rep max. By the way, I am that person who can do 15 reps at 70%. Those people are going to experience a 3x8 at 70% protocol very differently. But if we give those same people 3x8 at RPE anywhere between 6 to 8, they can self-select the appropriate load. And they'll train at the same relative distance to failure, or at least certainly closer than they did when we give them percentage of 1 rep max. I've personally noticed that percentage-based training can quickly lead to failure and frustration for many athletes because it doesn't allow for normal daily fluctuations in training. However, if I instead prescribed you something like 3 sets of 8 or 3 sets of 6 at RPE 8, like I just mentioned, you can self-select appropriate load. You and your friend can have the same prescription and train at the same relative distance to failure. Those might be different numbers because you're different people. And even week to week for the same person, those numbers might be different. But at least the training prescription is going to be appropriate for each person for each day, considering how they're performing within that session. So that's why I like RPE prescription over percentage of 1 rep max prescription. Many of you out there are probably really familiar with percentage of 1 rep max prescription, especially because I'm talking to mostly climbers here, especially because that's how a lot of hangboard programs are prescribed. But like I just said, this applies to hangboarding also. So your percentage of 1 rep max on any given day might not be accurate or appropriate for you that day, given your nutrition, given your sleep, given your levels of fatigue, given so many different things that can affect how you perform within a session and how you're able to express strength in a given session. So instead, I propose auto-regulating your training, or at least following a training program that allows you to auto-regulate your training. And if we're talking about hangboard training, I really like Eva Lopez's hangboard protocols because she allows for auto-regulation within those training programs. If you've seen those training programs and you're not auto-regulating and you're maxing out in those training programs on each session, every set, you're not following those prescriptions accurately. Okay, let's talk about some methods for implementing auto-regulation. So there are many methods for doing it. Some of the most popular methods are RPE, which is Rating of Perceived Exertion, RIR, which is Repetitions in Reserve, and VBT, which is velocity-based training. So for VBT, you actually have to have a device that measures the speed of your movement, and based on the speed of the movement, that will give you your RPE rating. I think it's a great way to auto-regulate. I think it's very accurate. I just think that it's not very accessible for most people because these devices that you have to buy cost anywhere from a couple $100s to a few $100s, and not everybody wants to invest in a device that expensive just to be able to strength train. A lot of the research that's done on RPE training is done with VBT, so it's very accurate, but it's not totally necessary. You can use RPE, you can use RIR, and you don't have to have ultimate precision to benefit from the system. You just have to do it consistently, and you have to practice it, and you have to be exposed to two different intensities and different rep ranges, and you will get pretty accurate with RPE RIR, and it's going to be useful for you. So let's talk about RPE. I want to give you guys a little bit of a background. So RPE, like I said, stands for Rating of Perceived Exertion. It was first developed by Gunnar Borg about 50 years ago as a way to quantify perceived exertion during exercise. During cardio type exercises specifically, he initially created a 6 to 20 scale, which sounds weird, but basically the reason he did that is because it roughly scales to heart rate. So resting heart rate about 60 beats per minute and max at about 200 beats per minute. So the 6 to 20. And he eventually created a more simplified like 1 to 10 scale, which is more widely used today. The way that I'm going to recommend using it for training, for using RPE for training and for any of my programs, was actually first adapted for use in strength training by Mike Tuchscherer in his book, The Reactive Training Manual. So Mike is a world champion powerlifter and one of the most respected powerlifting coaches in the world. And he's also a thought leader in the sport of powerlifting and somebody that I have spent time learning from online through his RTS Classrooms courses and Emerging Strategies courses. Now, these courses are specifically for powerlifting, but you can use a lot of the principles for general strength training as well. So we can use RIR, or reps in reserve, as a proxy for RPE, which can make it a little bit more a little bit more objective, because most people kind of get the idea of like how many more reps left they had in a set versus like how hard did that feel on a scale from 1 to 10. So I feel like it gives people something to anchor to, and it's a really great way to teach people how to auto-regulate. So I sort of combine RIR with RPE, and that is very popularly done in powerlifting and strength training. So it's not just something I do, it's a widely accepted practice. So again, the RPE scale goes from 1 to 10. RPE 10 is going to be a maximal effort. It means it's a successful set. You could not do any more weight, and you could also not do any more reps. Whereas RPE 1 is probably like a notch above laying in bed. So for the purpose of strength training, you usually won't see anything prescribed under RPE 5 to 6. Anything under RPE 5 to 6 is considered a warm-up intensity and doesn't need to be explicitly prescribed. So how do we use RIR with the RPE scale? So basically they are inversely correlated. And I will post a chart on my Instagram for you guys to reference, but basically RPE 10, like I said, is a maximal effort. You could not do more weight or another rep. RPE 9 means that you could do 1 more rep. RPE 8 means that you could do 2 more reps. RPE 7 means that you could do 3 more reps. RPE 6 means you could do 4 more reps, and so on and so forth. So basically, in a set, you're asking yourself, how many more reps could I have done? So whatever your prescription is, let's say you're doing a set of 8 on an exercise, you should be able to complete those reps and then have reps left in the tank. So if we prescribed something like RPE 8 reps at RPE 8, basically you should be able to complete the 8 reps and have 2 more reps left in the tank before you might fail. So essentially, it's like a 10 rep max effort, but you're not doing all 10 reps, you're only doing 8. And you're leaving 2 reps in the tank. And this applies to any rep range. So let's say we want to do a double 2 reps at RPE 8. That means you can do the 2 reps, but you only have 2 more reps left in the tank before failure. So essentially, a 4 rep max done for only 2 reps, leaving 2 reps in the tank. This can even apply to 1 rep. This is commonly done in powerlifting so that you can be exposed to a higher intensity and practice singles, because maxing out and doing heavy singles is a skill that you need to develop as a power lifter. So you'll see things in a program like 1 rep at RPE 8 or 1 rep at RPE 9. So let's just say we are prescribed 1 rep at RPE 8. That means you can do 1 rep, but you feel like you have 2 more reps left in the tank before you might fail. So essentially, a 3 rep max effort, but you're only doing 1 rep and leaving 2 reps in reserve. So hopefully that makes sense to people, and I will post the chart on Instagram so that you can get a visual. Okay, let's talk about another example, because I think this is also an important point for using RPE in your training that a lot of people get wrong. So let's use an example prescription of, let's say we're deadlifting, and the prescription is 8 reps at RPE 8 by 3. So what this means is you will perform 3 working sets of 8 repetitions each set. For this prescription, your RPE 8 is your target intensity. So you're going to warm up and you're going to continue adding weight to the bar until you feel like you've gotten to a set of 8 with an estimated 2 reps in reserve. And this goes for each of those sets. So essentially, you're looking for a 10 rep max intensity, and that's the reason why I'm using 8 reps, because it rounds up to like a 10 rep max intensity at RPE 8. So this is easier for people to understand. We could literally use any rep range for this. But basically, we're working up to a 10 rep max intensity, but you're only going to do 8 reps, and you're going to leave 2 reps left in reserve before failure. Now, I don't want you to calculate your percentage, your like 10 rep max, and then just work up to that weight and only do it for 8. I want you to actually warm up, add weight to the bar, and I want you to actually pay attention on each set and work up to a load where you can do 8 reps, but you estimate that you would only have 2 reps left before failure. I literally did this prescription today in my squat training. So I had 3 sets prescribed of 8 reps at RPE 7 for me. So I needed to leave 3 reps in reserve. And the mistake that I see a lot of people make with a prescription like this is they work up to that first working set and it might feel accurate. But then when they do the second set at the same weight, it starts to feel harder. So maybe they're a little fatigued, or maybe they didn't rest long enough, but they do the second set and now it's not RPE 8 anymore. It's now RPE 9 or RPE 10. And then what they do is they go ahead and do the same weight for the third set, and now it's RPE 10, or they fail. And that's not what we want to do. That is not the correct application of RPE. So if you are prescribed 3 sets at RPE 8, you want to make sure that each of those sets stays at RPE 8. So this might take a little bit of figuring out for you personally. Most people can maintain like 2 to 3 sets across at the same weight and keep it the same intensity, but not everybody. And so if you do your first set and it feels accurate, but then you do your second set and the RPE starts to climb, that means for the third set, you need to take weight off of the bar so that you can maintain that last set at RPE 8. You need to have those 2 reps left in the tank on each and every set. This goes for strength training. This goes for hangboarding if you're doing a auto-regulated hangboard workout, where with hangboarding, because we're not doing repetitions, like one hang is 1 repetition, it's more of an isometric exercise. We're just holding. We're not doing repetitions when we're on the hangboard. Instead of using reps in reserve on hangboarding, we're going to use seconds in reserve. That's how I adapt it. So you need to have that many seconds left in the tank, or that many reps left in the tank on each and every set. So I hope that you found that useful. I hope that some of my clients find that useful, because that is something that I'm constantly working on teaching people when they're first introduced to autoregulation. Another solution to that problem that I find is very common, especially for people who are newer to strength training, is if you find that your RPE is climbing between sets, sometimes it means that you're just not resting long enough. Ideally, you want to rest a minimum of 2 to 3 minutes between working sets, but sometimes up to 5 to 8 minutes between working sets if it's really taxing for you, so that your muscles can fully recover between sets and you can give 100% effort on each of those sets. And your RPE will be more accurate that way. You won't be carrying fatigue into the next set if you rest long enough. And I know that sounds really boring. I have a lot of clients who, when they first start out with me, are like, oh my God, this is so boring. You want me to just sit here for 3 minutes? Or you want me to sit here for 5 minutes? That's so boring. Like literally, I just sit here. Can I superset? Can I do something else in between? Can I do cardio in between? Can I do jumping jacks in between? No, rest. We're strength training here. We're not endurance training. We're not doing circuits. I need you to actually sit there and rest so that you can recover for the next set. And that is essential because we want you to be recovered so that you can produce force better on the next set, because that is going to lead to better strength adaptations. And if we're doing a strength program, strength adaptations are what we're after. If we program specifically like a superset, sometimes we will, or if we want you to minimize rest in between, coaches are typically going to say that in the prescription. And usually that is more for hypertrophy programs, endurance programs, cardio circuits, things like that. For strength training, you want to rest. So I suggest setting a timer so that you actually rest long enough. You can scroll on Instagram, you can read a book, you can talk to your gym partner, you can stare at the wall. You can meditate on your next effort, whatever you want to do. I usually listen to music. If it's not a really important training session, sometimes I'm looking on Instagram or I'm talking to people at the gym. If I'm getting closer to a powerlifting meet, I am not talking to anybody. I am listening to music. I am staring at the wall. I am thinking about what I need to do for my next set. But yes, it will be boring. Get over it. Your adaptations will be better if you actually rest. So I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned that. And that goes for hangboarding as well. A lot of times I hear people say that, oh yeah, I do, a hang every minute on the minute. Cool. That's not exactly a strength prescription. That's going to be a little bit more strength endurance or even endurance, depending on how many sets you're doing like that. I recommend resting at least 2 to 3 minutes, even between hangboard sets, working sets, because that's what's going to allow your muscles to recover so that you can give a good effort on subsequent sets. So set your timer, get ready to be bored, and get ready for your strength training to take off because you're actually resting appropriately. Okay, just wanted to add that stuff in there because these are common problems that I see in people that I coach, and I think a lot of people could hear that and benefit from it. But basically, you want to rest enough in between sets. You also want to adjust load so that you're not overshooting your sets, because that kind of cancels out the whole reason why we're doing autoregulation. We're not trying to go to failure for strength training. We don't need to go to failure for strength training. Yes, the training needs to be challenging enough, but you do not need to go to failure in order to get the benefits of strength training. And in fact, the only thing that you're getting by going to failure, because I know a lot of people are like, well, more is better, right? If I try harder, it's better. No, the only thing that you're gaining by going to failure repetitively, session after session, week after week, is you're accumulating more fatigue than you can actually recover from. And, best case scenario, you hit a wall really soon and the training program stops working. Worst case scenario, you might actually get injured because you're just doing more than you can recover from. So one of the big reasons why I love auto-regulating strength training and I love auto-regulating hangboarding is because it makes the dose more appropriate for you, and it keeps you further away from injury because we're making the training more recoverable. We're not going to failure every single time we train, and that is super important for sustainability. All right, I just want to mention some of the pros and cons of using RPE. So RPE is just one system for auto-regulating. Like any system, it's not perfect. There is a little bit of a learning curve for athletes who are new to it. and your accuracy can be off in one direction or the other if you're not monitoring yourself carefully. So I find that people, when they first start autoregulating, tend to err on one side or the other. One side being they're way too conservative and they're not actually going heavy enough, and they actually have way more reps left in the tank than they think they do. And then there's other people who love training, who love pushing it, who love going hard. I fall into this category. I will hit RPE 10 every single time if left to my own devices. And we don't want to be overshooting. And so I feel like some people actually overshoot a little bit and they think they have more reps in the tank when they don't. So if you're somebody who knows that you're a little more conservative, you can probably push yourself a little bit harder than you think. If you know you're somebody who loves to overshoot, you can probably be a little more conservative with your weight choices. And you're still going to get, even if you undershoot a little bit, you're still going to be getting stronger from your training. I also like to incorporate some RPE audits into the programming that I offer my clients. So in the foundational strength training program, we actually incorporate an RPE audit halfway through the program so that people can get a little bit more accurate with their load selection. So if you're new to strength training or you've just never been exposed to what an RPE 10 feels like, we do a little bit of that in the program. And I don't think it's bad to do that sometimes. Like we talked about earlier, how we don't want to be overshooting consistently in our programming. Like we don't want to be hitting RPE 10 all the time. If it happens every once in a while, that's okay. We can use that as information. It helps you become more accurate when you're selecting load using RPE. So we do an RPE audit in the program where we do an AMRAP, which means as many reps as possible. We actually have you rep something out so that you can feel what it's like to hit an RPE 10, and you can use that information to gauge your RPE a little bit more accurately. And I also expose people to different rep ranges in that program because I think it's also important to be exposed to different rep ranges to help you gauge your RPE. So there's lots of things we do in that program to help you learn how to use this system. So if that's something you're interested in, definitely check that out. You can check that out through my Instagram or through my website. But just wanted to add that in there because if you're new to training and you've never gone to RPE 10, you don't really have an anchor for how many more reps left you should have in the tank. And so sometimes we do want to expose people to that so that they have something to anchor their decisions off of. So I've been peppering in some of the pros of using RPE, but like I said, some of the cons are it's a system, it's not perfect. There is a little bit of a learning curve. However, research does show that most athletes are able to implement RPE with some degree of accuracy within a few weeks of practice. And perfect accuracy isn't necessary for you to benefit from this system. So a lot of times when I start a new athlete off, they are super obsessed with getting it absolutely perfect. And I don't want you to get paralyzed by perfection. I want you to just try it out. It's okay if you make mistakes. It's okay if you undershoot. It's okay if you overshoot initially. You will get more accurate with practice. Let's talk a little bit more about how exactly this plays out in a training session because I know I'm going to get some more questions about this. So let's get some definitions out of the way first. I've already mentioned some of this stuff, so I want to just give you a definition for it. So a work set or a working set is something, a vocabulary word or words that we use in training. And that just means that it's any set that is at your target intensity. So we want to count sets that are overshot as work sets, even if you failed them. Don't go back and make them up. So sometimes I'll have clients like accidentally overshoot and then they take weight off of the bar and they repeat the set. You don't need to do that, just FYI. But working sets are any set that is done at your target intensity, and stuff before that is usually just warm up leading up to that. Target weight. So I think it's good to have a target that you're aiming for in a training session. So a target weight is your planned work set for the session. So this is generally a planned increase in weight, but sometimes it can just be matching your previous session. And this is based off of previous session. It's just a guide. And this can be adjusted based on how warm-ups feel. So for new clients, you're going to be making gains really fast, especially if you haven't strength trained regularly. So I always plan a little bit of an increase in weight each week, maybe like 5%, something like that, something around there. And as you're warming up, that's sort of a weight that we're aiming for. But as you're warming up, you're paying attention to how you're performing. Remember, not necessarily how you are feeling, how you're actually performing, how fast the bar is moving, how heavy it's feeling, that kind of thing. How many reps you have left in the tank is what we're looking at. And you're going to make your decision based on that. So if things are flying and you're feeling really good, then you can increase to that target weight. If not, you can make an adjustment and either repeat the same weight you did last week or adjust down if you have to. And it's really, really normal for your sessions to fluctuate around 10%. That's super normal. So don't panic if that's happening. Like we talked about at the beginning of the episode, it is normal to have fluctuations. If you are seeing a downward trend in your performance over the course of like 2 to 3 weeks, then I start to worry. Then we might need to look at, okay, is the programming inappropriate for you? Is it too much? Is it too little? We need to look at things like sleep. Are you getting enough sleep? We want to be getting 7 to 9 hours of quality sleep every day as athletes who are training. And so if we're not, we want to figure out ways that we can change that. We want to look at nutrition. Are you eating enough calories to support your training? Are you losing weight? We don't necessarily want that unless you're on a weight loss program, which is not going to be most climbers, even though that's what most climbers want to do. That's not what's going to be the most beneficial for you long term. And we'll talk more about that later in the podcast. But we want to look at your nutrition. Are you eating enough calories to support training? Are you eating enough protein to recover from the training? Are you eating enough carbohydrates going into the session that you have energy for the session? We want to look at stress outside of the training program. Are you really stressed out? Is work stressful? Are you having relationship stress? Are you stressed out with kids? Are you stressed out with a sick parent? Like those kinds of things are going to affect you. And there's lots of other things that we can look at. But if you're noticing a downward trend over the course of 2 or 3 weeks, then we worry. But if we're not seeing that, we don't have to worry. It's normal for things to fluctuate. In general, you can add like 3 to 8% to the bar, and that's usually for most people going to increase the RPE by 1. But that's also like kind of a good guideline for adding weight to session. But then, like I said, or 5%, 3, 5%, 8%, something like that is usually pretty good for most people. And as you warm up, if you're noticing that you're performing really well, things are flying, sweet, let's add some weight to the bar. If you're not, let's either keep things the same as last week or adjust down to accommodate how you're feeling. So basically, you're adjusting based on how your warm-ups feel, and I highly recommend standardizing your warm-up routine because it will give you a sense of how things should feel to you on any given day. So this may take a while for people if you're new to training to standardize things because sometimes your strength is changing a lot. You're getting a lot stronger really fast, and so things change a lot. But for someone who's been training a little bit longer, or for someone like me, I've been training consistently for 10 years, I have a pretty standard warm-up that I do every single time for each lift. So I'm always hitting the same weights every single time on my warm-ups, and I know how those weights feel on a bad day. I know how those weights feel on a good day, and I know how those weights feel on an average day. And it helps me make adjustments or select load a little bit more appropriately because I know how those things feel normally. So that can be really helpful. That can be helpful for strength training. That can be helpful for hangboarding. And that can also be helpful for your climbing sessions. This episode specifically, I don't necessarily want to go into super detail on how to auto-regulate your actual climbing sessions, but in general, we're not going to use reps in reserve for climbing sessions, obviously, because that's not going to be helpful. But you can use just the general RPE scale of rating your effort level or rating your session RPE from a scale of 1 to 10. And sometimes that can be helpful for people. But I know someone will ask that question, so I just wanted to throw it out there. We can definitely do another podcast episode on auto-regulating climbing training if you guys want to hear that, so let me know. So just as a general guideline, just be prepared to adjust your plan if necessary based on how your warm-ups feel. If your last warm-up set is accidentally RPE 8, do not proceed to the target weight because you're about to overshoot. And it's far better to undershoot than it is to overshoot. Like I said, it is okay if you overshoot every now and then. We just don't want to make it a consistent habit because you're going to get too fatigued from your training. We can use it as a learning opportunity, but in general, chronically, it's better to undershoot than it is to overshoot because if you accidentally hit an RPE 7 or an RPE 6 instead of an 8, guess what? You're probably still within range to get a strength training benefit from that intensity. So you're going to be fine versus like if we're always overshooting, you're doing too much and you're going to hit a wall really fast. You're not going to be able to recover from the training as well. And that's not good. So you can always add more weight if you need to, but if you overshoot, then you failed to follow the prescription. And as a result, like I said, you're going to accrue more fatigue from that set than is intended by the program. So that is all I have to say about autoregulation, RPE, RIR right now. But I did have some questions from people on autoregulation from Instagram. So I wanted to make sure that we covered some of these questions in case they weren't answered here through the information in the podcast. If you guys still have questions after this episode, because there's so much more to autoregulation than I just said, this is just like a basic overview. It doesn't necessarily talk about how to program with autoregulation. There's so much more to it. So if you guys have specific questions about autoregulation, definitely leave me a question on Spotify. You can leave a question right on the episode. If you're not on Spotify, feel free to message me on Instagram or send me an email, natasha@natashabarnesrehab.com, and I will make sure that we answer those questions in subsequent episodes. But let's go over some of these Instagram questions that I got. One of the first questions I got was how to autoregulate on days something hurts or feels off. So this is a little bit different. So some people will be able to use reps in reserve. You just kind of work up to what you can do that day as long as the pain stays tolerable for you. But when we're factoring pain into RPE, into an RPE rating, what is the highest level of symptoms that I consider to be tolerable? So we're going based off of like, how many more reps should you do based on your pain level or your symptoms? So if you're dealing with symptoms, my general recommendation, this is not medical advice. None of the people here listening are my patients right now at this moment in time. But generally my recommendation is if you're having symptoms during a session, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't train. What it means is you need to adjust the intensity or the weight that you're lifting and make sure that it is tolerable for you during the session. So what that's going to look like is you're going to warm up, and if you're having symptoms, you might want to slow down your warm up, make smaller jumps in your warm up, and start with an even lighter weight to kind of feel things out. And I would try to follow the prescription. So try to do the amount of reps that are in the prescription, but work up to what feels tolerable for you. That doesn't necessarily mean pain-free. It's okay to have some discomfort during a session. And even if you have an injury, like a torn labrum, a rotator cuff tear, a tendinopathy, again, this is not medical advice because you guys are not my patients right now, but my general advice is these things need to be loaded. It is okay to load these things, and we'll do a whole episode on rehab. We're probably going to do multiple episodes on rehab, but general advice, a little bit of discomfort can be okay. In fact, we have some research that shows that leaning into a little bit of discomfort in a training session can be beneficial for rehab and leads to better outcomes. We want to keep it tolerable for you, and that's going to vary person to person, but it should feel tolerable for you during the session. And we don't want to be triggering symptoms that last longer than about 24 to 48 hours. So it can be okay if you have some discomfort during the session. It can also be okay if you have discomfort after the session or even the next day. We want to see your symptoms return to baseline, whatever baseline is for you, within about 24 to 48 hours. And usually that means you selected a load that was tolerable and that your body was able to recover from. Worst case scenario, if you go a little too heavy, because sometimes it can be hard to tell in the session. Like for some people, it can feel totally fine during the session. And then, 2 days later is when they find out, like, okay, this was not okay. That's also okay. For the most part, as long as you're not doing anything ballistic, you're not loading like a buffoon and like hitting RP 10s for every set, you're probably not going to make your injury worse. I think worst case scenario, if you go heavier than you can currently tolerate, we have some information now, and you have symptoms that last longer than 48 hours. Let's say like 3 days later, you're like, yeah, it's actually feeling a little bit worse from that session. Now you know where that line is. Let's say you have shoulder pain. Now you know where that line is for your shoulder, and you can work a little bit under that in subsequent sessions. So hopefully that's helpful. Like I said, that is not medical advice. You are not my patient right now, but that is some general advice that I give to people. That might be different person to person. That might be different case to case. But that is some general advice on kind of how to approach using RPE during a session where you might have symptoms. Somebody else asked this question. I'm not sure. They had another question that they asked, and I'm not really sure what they meant by the question. But the second question that they asked is what to do when you feel like you have plateaued using RPE. So you probably haven't plateaued using RPE. You probably have just plateaued on that specific program. So, because you can use RPE for the rest of your life and still make progress in your strength training. I've been doing it for probably 8 or 9 years and still making progress. So you don't plateau using RPE, you plateau on a specific program or a specific prescription of the program. So if you feel like you've plateaued, and I want to caveat, a plateau should be something like you are not increasing the load or increasing how many reps you can do or able to increase how many sets you can do for more than like probably 2 or 3 weeks. If things are staying the same for that long or they're dropping, then we want to change the program. So you might just need a different program with a different prescription. It's possible that you need more volume. I find that a lot of climbers actually start to need more volume or frequency in their upper body movements sooner than they need that in a squat or a deadlift. So it could be that you just need a little bit more volume. So probably not that you've plateaued using RPE. You've probably just plateaued potentially in that program. So you probably just need a new program. And we have more programs launching in the app very soon. Somebody else asked, is the RPE chart from Mike T the go-to for everything RPE? Is it valid to use for accessories, isolation? I think it is. I do not use RPE like the way that Mike T uses it for cardio exercises, but we can use it for any kind of strength training exercises, whether it's an accessory exercise, an isolation exercise. So I think we talked about this in the last podcast, but generally for compound movements, we're probably going to use an RPE of anywhere from, I would say, 6 to 9 is generally my preference. Some people like to program as low as RPE 5 for those, and some people like to program up to RPE 9. It depends on the person whether or not I'm going to use RPE 9, but somewhere in there is good for compound movements, so like multi-joint movements, barbell movements, things like that. For isolation exercises, so single joint movements or other isolation exercises like rehab exercises, like the classic like external rotation, like rotator cuff exercise, you can generally prescribe a little bit higher or closer to failure for those exercises. So somewhere between RPE 7 and RPE 9 or even 10 for some of those exercises. Because a lot of times we're using accessories or like isolation exercises as a way to get a little bit more volume in the training program. and a little bit of hypertrophy. And for hypertrophy purposes, we actually do need to be working a little closer to failure, or for single joint movements, we do need to be working closer to failure. So you can still use the Mike T autoregulation RPE chart that we discussed in this episode. The prescription might vary based on the movement, though. And then somebody else asked, at what RPE do I think about adding reps or weight or sets? So it's not about like getting to a certain RPE and adding reps or adding weight or adding sets. I wouldn't really think about it that way. I would just follow the programming and hit your RPE and follow the rep ranges that are in your program. If you're programming for yourself, listen to the last episode because we talked about some guidelines for reps and sets. But there's other ways to use autoregulation as well for autoregulating volumes. You can put a fatigue stop on a set. So for example, you could program something like 6 to 8 reps at RPE 7, and then you could do subsequent sets where you cap the RPE at RPE 8, meaning you do as many reps as you can with that same weight until you hit RPE 8. So it may be the same number of reps, it may be more reps, maybe less reps if you're getting fatigued later on in the set, but that's a way to auto-regulate the volume. Or you could say something like, continue hitting sets at this weight until you hit an RPE 8 or an RPE 9. There's so many different ways to use it. So it depends on how it's being prescribed. But it's not like you hit a certain RPE and now you need to add more reps or you need to add more sets. But you might need to add more weight. So let's say you get, a set of 6 at RPE 8. And you work up to the weight that you think it might be, and you feel like you have more reps left in the tank. So RPE 8 is going to be leaving 2 reps left in the tank. Let's say you think you have 3 or 4 more reps in the tank. So in that case, I'd recommend adding like 3 to 8% to the bar while keeping the rep range the same. And that's probably going to get you to that next RPE of RPE 8. So if the weight is feeling too light, then you got to add weight. But I don't really generally use that for adding reps or sets unless that's specifically in the prescription for the program. So hopefully that answers your question. This one's not a question, but somebody said, not a question, but I ended up applying autoregulation to everything in life. And I think that's really cool. I've had people tell me they've applied it to their writing habits, where before they would write and write and write. Like this person is obviously a writer. They would write and write and write until they felt so burnt out from writing that they would have to take days or weeks off of writing because they just couldn't do it anymore. And instead of doing that, they would work up to what felt like an RPE 7 out of 10. So 7 out of 10 effort towards their writing and stop when they got to about that intensity for themselves or about that feel for themselves with their writing, and they were able to make their writing more sustainable. I've had artists tell me that they're able to do kind of the same thing when they're working on art pieces and make their art more sustainable. I think it's just a good skill to have as a human being and as an athlete, realizing that like we don't need to go to failure on everything, whether it's strength training, whether it's reading, whether it's writing, whether it's creating art. Like it doesn't help you to push yourself to ultimate failure or, the highest intensity or the highest effort level that you possibly could on stuff like that. It's actually going to be more sustainable if we leave a little bit in the tank. And I feel like that's intuitive to a lot of people, but I find that like once my clients start incorporating autoregulation into their training, they find ways to actually incorporate it into their lives as well. And if you are able to do that, highly recommend it. So it sounds like people are learning a lot more from autoregulation than just how to pick weights for their program. That's all the relevant questions I got for now on RPE. I typically will ask questions in my Instagram stories. So if you are listening to this podcast and you're not following me on Instagram, definitely go ahead and do so. I will link it in the show notes, and occasionally when I'm prepping for an episode, I will ask my audience questions. And if you have questions about a specific topic, I'm going to make sure that we cover that in the content of the podcast, or I'm going to make sure that I answer some questions at the end of the episode if I'm able to. So go ahead and give me a follow there. Ask me any questions that you have. Feel free to DM me anytime on Instagram if you have questions or ideas of things that you want to hear me talk about on the podcast, and I will make sure to keep that in mind. After this podcast episode, definitely planning on talking to some nutrition experts. We're going to talk about the whole concept of stronger, not smaller. We're going to talk about weight gain, weight loss in climbing. We're going to talk about all kinds of things that people love to hear and talk about when it comes to climbing training. But if you have any ideas, any questions, anything you would like to hear, definitely let me know. If you're looking for a program that incorporates autoregulation or incorporates a lot of the concepts that we've already talked about on this podcast in previous episodes, I have a program for you. The Foundational Strength Training Program is for you. It's a 10-week program. It's going to help you learn all of this stuff. It's going to help you learn how to strength train. It's going to help you learn how to auto-regulate your training. So if you're somebody who feels like they could benefit from that, definitely join the program. You can find the link to that in the link in my bio. We are going to be adding more programs into our app very soon. So that program is definitely repeatable, and I've had people repeat it like up to 3 or 4 times and still make progress. Actually, I think I have someone who said they've done it like 6 times and still made progress. But we also have more programs coming, including the in-season program, so stay tuned for that. If you want help with an injury, if you want to talk more about some symptoms that you're having or get help with an injury, go ahead and book an injury consultation. You can also do that in the link in my bio on Instagram, or I will leave that in the show notes as well, and we can definitely help you with that. Otherwise, this is the end of the episode, and I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope you guys stick around for the next episode.